Okay, good morning to all of you. Thank you for coming. Welcome to Bilbao. This is actually an activity of the Conflex Network and the Universidad Autónoma de Madrid, but as you know, universities are now very international, so they can also run workshops, say 300 kilometers away. I don't know whether you check the map, but Madrid is in the middle of Spanish Peninsula, and we are like 3-4 hours drive north. But we thought that this will be a nice place to meet for this future. I would like first to do some kind of motivation or from an historical point of view, and also trying to explain how control and design, optimal design, these are two topics, play a significant role in the field of fluid mechanics and structures, in which you will typically use models written in terms of partial differential equations that often are called also as distributed parameter systems. Have you ever heard this word, distributed parameter system? And do you know what does it mean? Or I always found this terminology a bit strange, right? Distributed parameter system. But okay, this will be more clear after this presentation. And these arises, these topics arise in a way or another in many applications. Some of the contemporary applications we could mention many others, but definitely there are many in mechanics, like robotics or aeronautics or automotive industry. Definitely more and more in biology and medicine. Of course, classical fields such as energy, electricity, chemistry, economics. These are topics that are evolving, and in this evolution they are bringing new questions that need of new mathematics, new control mathematics in particular. And on the other hand, also the advances in control mathematics are allowing us to address topics that until now were somehow out of reach. Concerning the origins, there are many. There is actually, maybe later I can find the reference. I will give it to you. There are two very nice books on the history of control engineering, where you can find a lot of descriptions of how this field arose as an interaction, say, in between engineering originally, mathematics and computer science, right? So it's very hard to say whether control is math or engineering. Some people are doing simply control engineering, some others will tell you that they are dealing with, say, the mathematical control theory. This is typically a hybrid model, and everyone recognizes, or many people recognize, that somehow the origins are also, say, rather philosophical. In the book by Aristoteles on politics, he says something like this. So he somehow claims the necessity of making many of the processes that at the time were done, handmade, man-worked, to make them automatic in order to make humans more free, right? And this is something that is ongoing now permanently, right? So there is a thermostat regulating temperature here. We don't need to take care of this. So maybe we have to make the correct choice of the target temperature, but once it is done, we don't need to have one person devoted to play the on and the off to make sure that temperature is regulated, right? So this is a very simple example. It wasn't that way a few decades ago, right? So thermostats are relatively new. I don't know, so maybe, the first thermostat I have seen at home was maybe 25 years ago. So maybe for you it was different, but in the old times, at home you have to permanently make the choice of the on and the off in order to have the temperature regulated. So then, from a mathematical point of view, there are tools that are common to different fields, in particular control and design, right? So in some sense, these mathematical tools can then be implemented in different manners depending on how do you formulate, how do you address the control problem. And there are, I will say, oversimplifying, two ways of doing. One is the passive way, in which you rely on the quality of the design, right? So, for instance, here there is some carpet. You know, there is not a wood-made or a stone-made floor, and this is in particular, you know, related to acoustic isolation, right? So if you were sitting, you know, living in a hotel where in the upper floor there was a hard floor, and someone decided to play, you know, with a billiard ball, right? It will be extremely noisy, right? So this is why you design, right, the building in a way that there is some carpet that will, say, passively absorb noise in order to, say, minimize the acoustic perturbations for the person downstairs. Okay? So this is a typical example in which you do the design a priori. So you design the windows so that the light gets in. You know, you design the rooms with a large size. You also have all these, you know, cracks in these walls. Probably this is also related to some acoustic absorption problem, right? So we don't want noise to reverberate to bones, right? So you design the building a priori, the car, the ship, the airplane, a priori, so that the functioning of this mechanism is optimal to some extent, right? This is why also the shapes of the cars are all getting closer and closer and closer, right? In the 60s, it was very easy to recognize one car, one brand from another by the design. Now the designs, they are all converging. This is probably because they are using, you know, flow control minimization in order to search for the optimal shape. And then the optimal shape, from an aerodynamical point of view, is of course similar for all of them. Then this is the passive way of doing. This will be optimal design. This is very closely related to the field of the calculus of variations. So have you ever heard about the calculus of variations? So calculus of variations in mathematics, very much related to the theory of partial differential equations and also to geometry. And as the name says, calculus of variations is about what? It's about calculating variations, right? And variations is about say derivatives, it's about sensitivity, you know, with respect to parameter changes, something that is critical, right? So, of course, the key in order to get to a decent optimal shape, right, or nearly optimal shape, is to be able to understand how the mechanism, the system under consideration, behaves with respect to variations of the parameters, right? So once you understand, this is like if you are given a new, you know, a new engine, you know, you are offered a car, you will first test, right? So you will see how the car, you know, responds to acceleration or brake before you can, say, drive it in a comfortable and secure way. This is optimal design. Now, in the active control, we understand that there is an actuator that is acting all the time, right? So in here there is not actuator. If your design was right, you know, the functioning will be good. If the design was not right, you know, people will complain that the hotel is very noisy, right? And then you will have to take different measures like changing the carpet. So in here there is an actuator that will be acting permanently, right? So there is a device like you know, the heating device here that is ready to inject hot or cool air all time, right? So the way it works is the following: we are living in this cloud, right? And we are interested on being in, you know, in a silent environment. So we want to reduce noise, right? And there is some noise, there is some plus, there is always some noise. So you can hear the heater, you can hear also the ventilator of this video machine. By the rest, it seems we are quite isolated, right? There is not noise coming from from the park or from the airplanes, right? But there could be also some exterior noise coming from cars or people screaming around, you know, kids playing. Okay, so what we do is the following. We say we want noise to be 0, and then we have a sensor, right? We have a sensor that is measuring at all time what is the level of noise, right? So this gives us the error with respect to 0. So this is the level of noise. Right? So we have this first datum, right? So we have a sensor telling us the noise is epsilon, delta, 10, 11, okay? And you want to diminish this noise. But on the other hand, you have another second sensor, you know, outside, which is measuring the noise coming from the outside, right? Because even if the noise here was 0, if there is external noise coming, you have to take into account the source that is incoming permanently. So you have two sensors. One is measuring the, say, the remainder, the residual noise inside. The other one is giving you the added source that is incoming of noise. Then you have the addition of these two gives you the total, say, error, and with this you will apply a mathematical algorithm in order to apply, right, some control which will be implemented by an anti-noise mechanism. So this is the actuator, right? So you have two sensors, one actuator, and in this way you try to diminish noise. Well, probably you will not succeed completely. There will be some leftover, right? And even if you succeed in time t, there will be exterior source of noise incoming again, so you have to keep this ongoing all the time, right? So this is a typical example of dynamical control system in which the control has to be applied in a feedback manner, okay? So this is the two very different presentations of the same topic. This is more static, there is no time here. You will be playing with a geometrical object like the shape of an airplane, in which you have to determine the critical geometric features of this aircraft. And in the other one, this is more a time-dependent control problem. This is actually what you do when you are driving, right? When you are driving, you are observing how things are inside, but also, you know, trying to have an idea of how, you know, the peripheric information you are receiving, and you are deciding permanently through this feedback control. This is why learning how to do this feedback control is not that easy, and so here in Spain you have to take 20 lessons or so, and it's quite expensive because each lesson is like 50 euros, so you have to spend, well, at least, maybe now it's cheaper after the crisis, but basically you have to spend 1,000 euros to get the driving permit, isn't it, Arturo?
Yeah.
How much is the driving permit nowadays?
1,100.
Yeah, yeah. So, Mark?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it has always been expensive.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. So now, but of course, noise reduction, we identify noise with acoustics, but noise can refer to any other process, right? So noise is simply some unwanted perturbation on the issue under consideration, right? So noise can be also, you know, on an image, right? So we identify, do you know this ESR? No? You know this ESR? No? Okay. Well, it doesn't really matter, but you can easily tell me where is noise. So where do you see the noise, on the right or on the left? On the left. We all see that, we don't know how this was done, right? But clearly, this is a noisy image, and maybe here there is still some noise, but there is definitely less noise here to the right than to the left, okay? Well, of course, when you are in a static setting, you can play a lot with some of the fundamental, say, mathematical operations, right? One of them is convolution, right? So this is really a strange operation. When this is introduced in class, for math students at least, this is done in a purely theoretical manner, and then, well, that's something really new, right? So we are used to, say, compute, say, adding functions or taking products of functions or quotients. I mean, that's, you know, that's a standard. And then even composition is something we understand quite naturally. But then one day the professor comes and says that the convolution of f and g is the integral of f of x minus y, g of y dy, right? And then, well, of course, because of the change of variables you can play here, this is shown, although this is not obvious in the first, you know, perception, that this is commutative, right? So you can also write it that way. And then you can say that this is the convolution of on G and F, right? Okay, so this is kind of a strange mixing operation. So I take an F, I take a G, but then I look at F and G at different locations, and then I do the product, and then I do some averaging. It's kind of a very strange mixing, right? So do you know convolution? Are you familiar? So what's for you convolution? What is the use of convolution?
I understand that if I do a convolution between f and g is a, for example, in the extreme case, a delta function, then it will still be the same one. So it's basically a smoother with a parameter to be chosen in fy.
Yeah, so that's one of the very peculiar things of convolution, right? So is the Dirac delta at 0, right, which is the unit mass concentrated on a single point, is the neutral element for convolution. I mean, that's very surprising, right? So in particular, one could think that if you take a nice function f and you do something on it through a Dirac delta, you will get something very strange, more singular or so, and no, you get the same, right? So any other Sean, about convolution, any other, do you?
Not much, I was going to talk about Dirac delta.
Julia? Ikram?
You can use it for random variables.
You can use it for random variables, for what?
To calculate the distribution of the sum.
The distribution of the sum, random variables?
Blurring for images.
Yeah.
Usually the smoothing effect, you use it when you have the noise is represented as non-smoothness, and the convolution takes an average of everything which is near and smooths it nicely. So you see a blur on it. This is why actually the picture you show
is related to this, right?
Convolution to the picture, and you blur everything out.
Yeah. So what Borjan is saying that is, for instance, if you take a function like this, so if you take a function like this, like the step function, right, characteristic function of an interval, so this will be a very simple photo, right? It's black in the middle, 0, all the rest. And then, of course, if you make the convolution, you can identify this image with a function, right? You know, taking values between 0 and 1, 0 for white and 1 for black. Then if you take the convolution with Dirac delta, of course nothing happens, right? You get the same. But if rather than taking the Dirac delta, you take an approximation of the identity, right? This is an approximation of the identity. This is a sequence of functions phi epsilon that converge to Dirac delta, in the sense that you concentrate the unit mass more and more and more, right? So I recall you that this can be done by simply defining phi epsilon in that way out of a phi, which is say infinity and compact support. Some people call this say infinity C, right? Right, so meaning a function which is, as I said here, very, very smooth and with compact support, and provided the total mass of phi is 1, of course, by this change of variable, you are preserving the total mass of the function phi. The integral of phi epsilon is phi, right? It's the same as phi, is 1, but you are compressing the support, right? If the support of phi was for x less than L, right? If this was the support of phi, then the support of phi epsilon will rather be x less than L epsilon. So you are compressing the support. You are, of course, increasing the amplitude extremely by the factor 1 over epsilon. And then as epsilon goes to 0, phi epsilon converges to the Dirac delta, right? So Dirac has this genial idea to say, well, if you are thinking on limits of functions, you should not simply think on classical convergences, right? As we do typically, right? So we say, well, this function can be the limit of other functions that are oscillating a little bit around, right? He said you should also look to limits of functions that can produce objects like Dirac delta, right? Now, if you take the convolution of f with such a function phi epsilon, what do you get? You will get a smooth approximation like this, right? Okay, good. So convolution can be used to regularize. So in some sense we are mixing and therefore we are regularizing, right? So in this case we regularize simply because we are mixing, right, the 1 and the 0 according to the rule indicated by phi epsilon, right? Which says if you want to compute the value of the convolution at this point, at this interface, right, you don't look simply to the value of f at that point, but rather you look epsilon left, epsilon right, and then you mix. And because you are mixing, what you get is a compromise between 1 and 0, right? And then this is a very smooth function. And these kind of things can be done that way. So any other comment about the convolution? Any other important property of the convolution? No? You know this guy, Fourier? Is the name familiar to any of you? Yeah. So what does the Fourier transform and the convolution, how do they relate each other? The product. That's very impressive, right? So this really, I don't know how the convolution was discovered, right? But it could have been discovered through this formula, right? So actually this is something we could try to learn. Probably it's explained in the Wikipedia. So what is the origin of the convolution, right?
It was with random variables, because it's very natural. If you want to sum two random variables and look at the distribution, you take the convolution.
Yeah,
right.
Probably started from the Gaussian, and the Gaussian is related to Fourier by extension.
Okay, and Gauss is also related to random, right? So, okay, so all these things are definitely related, but you see, so here what we say is that another way of understanding convolution is just through Fourier transform. So the Fourier transform, as you know, is like a mirror, right? So you live in the space of x's, in the physical space, you apply the Fourier transform, and you get a new function which is living in the space of frequencies, right? This is actually why oftentimes dynamical systems and control problems can also be addressed from a frequency perspective. In fact, everything you can do in the physical space, by definition, because this is an isomorphism, you can do it also in the Fourier space. And actually, one of the choices as a scientist you have to do is when you use the physical space and when you prefer to move to the frequency domain, because sometimes things are better seen in the frequency domain than in the space domain. And then in the Fourier space, convolution is just product, right? In particular, this means that if, for instance, you take G such that G hat is equal to the characteristic function of some, say, frequency band, then what you will do is out of the function f, right, that is given in the physical space, you will take the Fourier transform, you will see the Fourier version of this function f, and because you are multiplying by this cutoff function, you will remove out of this function f all the components which are related to high frequencies, right, which are the more oscillatory components, right? and then you will go back, right, through convolution and get something which is very close to the f, but in which some high frequency components like these small unwanted oscillations have been removed, right? So this could very well be the case that this has been done through some Fourier filtering by using convolution with a function g, so that the Fourier transform of g is the characteristic function of a set. So do you know which is the function g for which the Fourier transform is the characteristic function? Or the reverse. I mean, you can, because Fourier transform is going back and forth and the reverse Fourier transform has the same formula, this is another magic of the Fourier transform, right? Is that the inverse Fourier transform has definitely essentially the same formula, just you know, switch from xi into minus xi or something like this. Huh? So this is the exponential, the g is exponential. Okay, so by the way, I forgot to say, and this is very important, I was asked to give you a list of exercises, right? Because here we are lecturing like 8 hours per day, but you still have 16 hours per day to do something else. I mean, we can consider that they will say 10 hours to get some rest, but they still have 6, right? So then you need some exercises. So exercise number 1 is to find out the origin of convolution. The exercise number 2 is to discover what is the function f such that the Fourier transform of f is the characteristic function of a set. Okay?
Sorry, maybe I'm the only one, but I don't know the meaning of a characteristic function of a set.
Yeah, characteristic function of a set in mathematics in general. So if we are considering functions f from Rn into, say, R, right, of n Euclidean variables, then you take any set k in Rn, right, of any shape, right, so this is Rn, and you take the set k, the characteristic function sometimes is also called, I think, indicator function, is the function that takes value 1 for x in k and 0 outside. Okay? So does anyone know what is the any problem? Which is the function that okay, so the exercise number 3 will be just check what Palais-Wiener says. Okay, have you ever heard of these two fellows? Palais-Wiener, what does Palais-Wiener say? Do you you know?
I don't really.
Okay, good.
I think he says something about Hardy spaces.
About?
Hardy spaces.
Hardy spaces, yes, but it says something simpler than this originally. Okay, so but this was when Palais and Wiener were working when? When this happened?
40s.
Huh?
In the 40s.
Even earlier, probably, right? But it was, say, early 20th century, 100 years ago. These guys were struggling to understand precisely how, you know, the game to play was precisely how, you know, you see in the Fourier space the properties of the function in the physical space, right? And in particular, they were very much interested on characterizing what are the functions that are band limited. So what are the functions in the physical space? What do you need to know of a function in a physical space so that the Fourier transform is band limited, meaning that the support is concentrated on a given band of frequencies, right? I mean, that's a fundamental theorem for all related to the frequency domain approach, in particular also to control. And then, as I said, one of the main tools in order to, you know, employ convolution is the Gaussian. The Gaussian is definitely the simplest example of approximation of the identity, right? So the Gaussian is the function is g of x is what? Is exponential minus x squared over 4. You have to multiply here by a constant to make sure that the integral of the Gaussian is 1. You remember what this number is here?
Square root of 2pi.
Huh?
Square root of.
Okay, something like this. Okay, you can check whether this is the exact constant. So in that way you get the Gaussian, right? And the Gaussian is like this. You can of course regulate the variance of the Gaussian by introducing here some factor sigma that you have to take here into account also to make sure that the integral is 1. But this is a typical example in which by using this epsilon parameter you can concentrate the Gaussian more and more and more and more and produce an approximation of the identity, right? So the Gaussian is important for many reasons. Actually, this doesn't fit completely, right, in the definition I gave of approximation of the identity. Does it?
No, because I think you wanted to have a compact support.
Yeah, definitely. I wanted to have compact support, but actually I don't need it, right? So without the property of compact support, this function will also make an approximation of the identity to the Dirac delta. Now, for convolution purposes, of course, having the support of G not being compact, it means that whenever I am looking at the the convolution at any point, I am looking to all values everywhere, right? With an, say, exponentially small effect. This is a bit uncomfortable in the sense that I have to take all of them into account in this integral. This is why people often prefer to take convolution with compactly supported functions, because then you know that you are only looking into an epsilon neighborhood of the point in which you are computing the convolution.
So can you explain that again? Like why compact support is required?
Yeah. As I said, it's not really required, but it's convenient, right? So when you say, I take the convolution of two functions, f and g, at the point x, and then I write the formula. This is f of x minus y, g of y dy. And assume I have taken a function g whose support is from minus epsilon to epsilon, right? As I said, an approximation of the identity with compact support. So now I look to this integral and I say, well, in principle, this integral is defined from minus infinity to plus infinity. But because G has compact support between minus epsilon and epsilon, then you see immediately that this integral is localized between minus epsilon and epsilon. And then if y belongs to the interval minus epsilon epsilon, then x minus y belongs to the interval x minus epsilon x plus epsilon. Right? Then, as I said before, if you are using this function g to regularize such a step function or characteristic function, whenever you are sitting somewhere, you are only looking to values in a neighborhood, and then you are doing an averaging of, and you can understand in this example very well why when you move to the right you are going down to 0, right? Why? Because if I am here in the center and I write this formula, I have to look to the left and to the right, right? So here typically I will get 1/2, right? Why? Because I am looking to the left, there is nothing to the right. But if I move a little bit to the left, I will be looking more to the left, so I will take more 1s and less 0s, so this value will increase, right? So we'll go here, right? While if I am going to the right, this value, by the contrary, will go down, right? Okay. And as I said, this is very particularly useful when you are doing convolutions, but it's not necessary. Actually, if you do it with the function g, what happens is that all values enter into the integral, but because they are multiplied by this, say, amplification factor, which is exponentially small, most of them are negligible, right? Okay. So can you remind me what is the Fourier transform of the G? Itself, right? So actually, the Gaussian, you can use it to solve, for instance, the heat equation, right? And as you know, when you take the Fourier transform in a space in the heat equation, you get here modulus xi squared, right? The solution of this is exponential of minus xi squared t, right? And here you see, the Fourier transform of the Gaussian, right? So the Gaussian and the heat equation are, linked also. The Gaussian is the fundamental solution of the heat equation, right? Okay, good. So, and this is why in image processing often, the modern theory, the modern mathematical approach to image processing is often based on solving parabolic-like equations in the forward sense of time, right? So this is what tells you that, so this is also what tells you is that you can use parabolic PDEs for image processing, right? Why? Because if you give me an image f of x that you don't really like because it's blurry, it's full of noise, then you solve the heat equation with initial datum this image, then after time capital T, what you get is f of x convolution with the Gaussian that has been scaled by t, right? So you get a regularization of this initial function, right? So this is a PDE problem. You can check in your preferred textbooks in PDEs, and you will find a nice chapter about the well-posedness of the initial value problem for the heat equation, the role of the Gaussian, how the solution is given by convolution with the Gaussian, and so on. And then what people discovered was that, but this is also a way of doing image processing, right? Because if you understand the initial datum as an image, you just let the heat equation evolve, then you will get a new image there. But now, once you have understood this, you can say, well, but who tells me that I should use this heat equation? Maybe I could use a heat equation with, say, some variable density, right? With a coefficient, say, 1 to the left and 2 to the right. Then, in some sense, I will be regularizing more the image to the right than to the left. Right? For some reason, I can be interested on, on this image, I am interested on reducing the noise, but particularly reducing the noise to the right, because after all, I am not using the left side. Then maybe you will use a heat equation with some density coefficient, which is different one side or the other. Or then you say, well, but you see, in fact, I'm not very interested on, the values of the solution that are, very small. So if I am not interested on the values of the solution that are very small, then if I am not interested on the wide components of the image, which correspond to u equals 0, then maybe I can take a nonlinear heat equation like this, right? So then one of the trends in the PDE approach to image processing have been, how do you design your heat-like nonlinear possibly equation in a way that the image is, say, improved in the way you like, right? So this will be more like designing the model in order to achieve a desired goal, right? Okay, but these are, say, the origins. If you want to learn more about the state of the art in control theory, some of the challenges, there is this nice control and information in a rich world report by SIAM, the Society for Industrial and Applied Mathematics in the US. It was written like 15 years ago, but you can still have a look. There are plenty of references, you know, many topics, many challenges described there. And this is the front page, right? So I like this front page very much. So we can identify here a number of objects. So we have to say which one do you identify? Jin Chen. So do you identify any? Do you recognize here anything? Some of them are very easy, right? Choose one. So what is this?
The last one.
Well, no, now you lost your chance to choose. So now I choose for you. What is this?
This is a dial.
Huh?
It's a dial. No. Wait.
This is an old thermostat, right? Basically. Well, something like this. Okay, Shan, what is this?
This is an aircraft.
Yeah. This is a commercial aircraft?
No, I think it's more like a military.
Yeah, it's like a military. Okay. So, Julia, what is this? Is this China? Is this China? No, what country is this? It looks like the US, right? And you see a network here, right? Yeah, this could be a telecommunication network. I don't know whether these are airplanes or phone calls or internet connections, but this is a telecommunication network. And what is this, Vikram? Well, these are robots or engines or airplanes operating in the field, right? In some kind of military exercise, for instance. What is this, Borjan?
A boat.
No, this is the first airplane by the Wright brothers. What is this, Charlotte?
Mars.
This is a chip. But not a chip to eat, right? A chip, you know. What is this?
The ones they say.
You don't know? You see some wheels here? Yeah, this is like a robot, right? So some kind of...
Rover.
Yeah.
It's kind of drone that they explore
Yeah.
and they
Okay.
samples.
Okay. And what is this? Gaston. The most difficult one for you, Gaston. We have kept the...
Gimbal.
And now
Pietro.
I think well it could be something to observe the star and to check stuff, no? To navigate and to orient yourself, or it's a gimbal like ancient gimbal.
Yeah, it's a gimbal.
I don't know whether of the two.
Nathaniel?
Maybe.
Short sighted. Yeah. Maybe it's a square gyroscope. I don't know.
Maybe used for navigation, find direction.
Andrea?
No clue.
Maybe it's a control book, maybe I guess.
So, so this exercise number 4.
is this used in oil?
I think it measures the rotation and then.
Okay, that's good. So in some sense it's related to rotation. So example 4, exercise 4 is the ball regulation mechanism. I think it was introduced by Watt, right? So this is to regulate pressure, for instance. So you maybe you have seen these old you know, cooking devices where you close, right, and you want to keep the pressure inside constant, right? What is the risk? The risk is that you heat, because this is totally closed. If pressure goes too much high, then this can blow up, right? So what you want is that when the pressure reaches a given maximum level, you let the steam go out so that pressure is reduced. And this is done by a rotating mechanism. Pressure increases. When when pressure increases, this vertical axis accelerates, right? So this produces a faster and faster rotation of this engine, and then these balls go up, right? And because they go up, then they pull, right? This other axis pulls the vertical one upward, and then it opens the gate a little bit, right? So steam goes out, pressure diminishes, velocity reduces, and then this was used also, for instance, in the old gramophone, right? To keep the constant velocity of rotation, right? So this was probably one of the most important devices in the Industrial Revolution, right?
So it's not a sensor, it's an actuator. Right?
It's an actuator.
Wow.
Yeah, you can say that it's both.
Yeah, it's both.
It's sensitive to pressure,
And at the same time,
and at the same time it's actuating. It's both of them are built in, right? Yeah, and this was also, I mean, in the DVD readers, I mean, there are engines that are doing this, right? Because you need, you know, the CD reader, you need to keep the velocity of rotation constant, right? I mean, if the velocity of rotation is not constant, then the music doesn't sound up nice, right? Because you have, you know. Okay?
What is the sixth picture?
Oh, this is yeah, this is a cancer cell, but this is not that. I mean, this is a diagram of a cancer cell taken from I think an article by Eduardo Sontag. So I will refer to his book, but he has a nice book on control systems in Springer that you can download for free, and it's a very nice introduction to the basics of say the mathematical theory of control systems. Okay? Good. Okay, so the calculus of variation. The calculus of variation started with very, say, simple problems, like and very practical ones, right? So one of them is this isoperimetric inequality, right? Isoperimetric inequality refers to the problem in which you have to cover a maximum area with a minimum perimeter, right? So this was used, for instance, in the cities like Carthage in Tunisia or in Cologne, right, in Germany, where you see this kind of configuration, right? So the city is facing the sea or the river, and then the city adopts this half circle geometry. Why? Because with this half circle geometry, you maximize the surface inside by minimizing the perimeter, which is good in order to defend the city from the enemies, right? So maximize area, minimizing perimeter, then you get always the circle, right? This is the so-called isoperimetric inequality, and this was somehow the first problem in the theory of the calculus of variation, which is what is the optimal shape in 2D or in 3D so that a given, say, physical quantity is optimized, right? So there are, say, problems like this in many applications. In particular, if you are dealing with problems in aeronautics, then you will try to look for the shape of the aircraft so that the drag, for instance, is minimized, or the lift maximized, or whatever. Okay? So this is the simplest problem in the calculus of variations. And of course here, why this problem is called calculus of variations? So why people refer to this as calculus of variations? So why variations, right? Why variations?
Because we are there and see how the area is
Right.
floating.
Right. So how do people practically address these kind of problems? Right. So another problem will be compute the shortest path between points A and B, right? So I give you 2 points in the space, and I ask you, can you please tell me what is the shortest path joining A and B? This is not a very difficult problem, right? So we know it's the segment, right? Okay, but now assume I do it in a geometry which are a little bit more complicated. Now you are living in this surface, right? You are hiking in the Pyrenees, right? And this is the shape of the manifold in which you are walking. And now I give you 2 points. So one here, so one here, and the other one back there. And I ask you, could you please tell me what is the shortest path? Well, now things are not that easy, although it shouldn't be that hard, right? Because in some sense, if I will project this into the plane,